Announcements none, papers none, question none, motion.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I move that all the business on today's order paper be exempted from the provisions of paragraph 2 of Standing Order 10.
The question is that all the business on today's order paper be exempted from the provisions of paragraph 2 of Standing Order 10. Those in favor say aye, those against say no. The ayes have it.
Statement by Ministers none, public bill, second reading.
Honourable Leader.
Mr. Speaker, sir, firstly I'll start with a complaint. The budget was read on Friday, finished around 7 p.m. Monday, 11:30 p.m., we have to start our budget debates and our speeches. That doesn't give the opposition even one full working day to study the budget, and especially myself, not even one full working day. Now, normally the budget is read on a Thursday. It is read on a Thursday, and the opposition leader speaks on a Monday. If it is read on a Friday, the normal courtesy is that for the speeches to start on a Tuesday. We have not been given this courtesy, Mr. Speaker, and I wanted to register that, and I hope that in future we return to the normal courtesies that are due in this House, Mr. Speaker. Now, the annual budget exercise. What is it? It's our local state of the nation speech. It should be, Mr. Speaker, and we've said, it should be a frank and open discussion. This is the situation in the country. This is the problem that we are facing. And the population must be told what the real situation is, what the real issues are, what are the challenges ahead of us. And it's not just, Mr. Speaker, be given as a pill to put everyone to sleep. Mr. Speaker, we should treat Mauritians with respect. They should and they must be told the actual situation and the truth. And it is the responsibility of the Minister of Finance to speak to the nation with candor, give the bad and the good news. And the truth is that things are getting from bad to worse, and the worst thing is that this budget does not in any way address the real issues that need to be addressed. Mr. Speaker, a budget speech is in reality a patriotic act. We do it because we feel that we need to address the situation and bring the nation to a better future. That is what a budget speech is. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I deplore, that the Minister of Finance, the government, has not acted with courage, has not assumed its responsibilities. And again, Mr. Speaker, sir, the venerable office of the Minister of Finance has a responsibility in front of the nation, and you cannot shirk away from that responsibility. What sort of budget is it? In one line, it is a tax and not spend budget. Usually we've heard of a tax and spend budget. This, Mr. Speaker, like the previous budget last year, is a tax and not spend budget. Mr. Speaker, PwC, I have the report here, has done a very good exercise at summarizing the budget. And they pick up quite rightly, sir, that of the amounts voted for COVID last year, whether it's in the MIC, whether it's in the special funds, or whatever there were, of the amounts voted, 122 billion rupees remain at the end of the year unspent. And again, put in the MIC, put in the special funds. In the special funds, Mr. Speaker, would you believe that after a full year of crisis, we are opening the special funds with 35 billion rupees of unexpended money? So, last year, various provisions were made. Let me just put this properly. Various provisions were made to set aside 145 billion rupees for COVID. This is why the Minister of Finance said in his very first line, Mr. Speaker, that according to him, we were in the top 4 with the largest COVID response in the world. But as usual, it's a half-truth. Because of that top 4, 32% of GDP that he put aside, only a quarter has been spent. The rest is in the coffers, and I will tell you why in a moment, Mr. Speaker, that we have 2 years running a tax and not spend budget. Mr. Speaker, in my opinion, what is happening is that the government, through these taxes, through this raiding of the Bank of Mauritius, is building a war chest. This is not an economic budget. This is a political budget. Its aim, Mr. Speaker, is to amass as much money as possible in the MIC, in the special funds, so that when we come, and the next year we know the budget will be 2022, 2023, when we come to the eve of an election, then, Mr. Speaker, what will happen? It will be generosity, giving millions of rupees left, right, and center, masking the fact that we are in deep economic trouble. This is, Mr. Speaker, next. So we are preparing, Mr. Speaker. This is the first act in what has been called money politics. Because next election, it is clear to me, next election, what this government is preparing is a huge war chest that it will be able to give the PRB. It will be able to increase pensions. It will be able to do everything that it wants. It will be able to do everything that it wants. Not because the economy is flourishing, not because the economy is healthy, but because we have been fooled all the time, because the Bank of Mauritius has been raided, and we have been fooled all the time, all along. And that, Mr. Speaker, I am willing to bet that in the special funds at the end of next financial year, the 20 billion that has been budgeted, in fact, is going to be 40 billion, because most of the funds that are being earmarked will not have been spent. But anyway, we'll come to that in a moment. So for me, Mr. Speaker, the aim of this budget is to build up sufficient amounts of money for political purposes to build up a war chest to thwart democracy at the next election. Mr. Speaker, failure to tell the truth to the population will bring a disconnect with the population. And in fact, the budget speech becomes a meaningless exercise. And you see, Mr. Speaker, in the population, most people were out doing the shopping. Very few people actually were listening to the budget speech. Because you cannot trust the figures that are provided. It destroys the whole credibility of the minister and the ministry and the government itself for the budget exercise. If you cannot trust the figures, then you say, well, you can't trust anything. So, Mr. Speaker, giving the wrong figures, to me, shows that government has many things to hide. It cannot face the facts, and therefore it cannot change the situation, but it can change how it portrays the situation. And there are some examples in this budget, glaring examples. One, Mr. Speaker, is the current year's budget deficit and the public debt. We all know that the Bank of Mauritius, on the 7th May 2021, issued a public notice in relation to the 60 billion rupees that it had contributed to government some time back. And it said quite clearly, Mr. Speaker, that of that 60 billion rupees, only 32 billion rupees was a grant given, a gift to government. The rest of the 28 billion rupees is, according to the Bank of Mauritius, Mr. Speaker, It is an advance, a loan against future dividends payable, so the government will get dividends in the future, 10, 20, 30 years from now, and it will be using that dividend to repay the loan that has been granted. It's quite clear what it says here. Minister of Finance is saying no. We'll see what the Director of Audit has to say about it. Because neither you or I will in fact finally decide. Now, so it is for any accountant, anyone who realizes, who understands finance, a loan is a loan, an advance is an advance. You give something to someone, and if you deduct it against future salaries, it is still a loan that you have given, say, to your employee. Now, the first issue of ignoring this loan of 28 billion rupees, that is 28,000 million rupees, is to falsify the budget deficit. The budget deficit announced by the Minister of Finance of 5.6% must in fact be doubled to nearly 12%. Because the 28 billion rupees, still doesn't understand. I think genuinely, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance doesn't understand. And that is worrying me a lot. Because the 28 billion rupees represents 6% of GDP. That has not been granted to you as a revenue, Mr. Minister of Finance. That has been given to you as a loan. Therefore, a loan goes in the deficit. The deficit, therefore, is not 5.6%. It is 11.9%. And that is, therefore, the first untruth that has been put in this budget. It is a loan that needs to be repaid from future profits. And the Bank of Mauritius quite clearly sets the 28 billion rupees in its balance sheet as an asset. The 32 billion rupees has disappeared from its balance sheet, giving it free. But the 28 billion remains in the balance sheet of the Bank of Mauritius as an asset. So, Mr. Speaker, I would like, I don't know if Mr. Bola will reply, someone else will reply, but it needs to be replied. Where have the 28 billion rupees advance loan given to the government? Where has it been? Where has it been? Where is it? Because I cannot see it anywhere. Now it could be that it has been deducted from advances from deposits that the government has at the Bank of Mauritius. That could be. But that needs to be shown also, if that is the case. And it just cannot be netted off. It's against any financial practice to net off. And anyway, you cannot net off 28 billion rupees of a loan against deposits of 33 billion. It's not the same figure. There is 5 billion somewhere hanging around. So what has happened to that? And so, Mr. Speaker, let's hope that we get clarification. Otherwise, definitely, I will send a letter to the Director of Audit. I trust him. Send a letter to the Director of Audit to tell him what I think has happened and to tell him to give us his opinion in due course when he certifies the accounts, probably, what has happened. But it is extremely worrying, Mr. Speaker. There has been years and years of debate on how the budget deficit is being manipulated, how the public debt of government is being manipulated. And here we have a glaring example, and we want the government to reply. The next speaker after me himself is a qualified accountant, and I'm sure that he would have been briefed to reply to this issue. Anyway, it will be very disappointing if he doesn't give a proper reply. Mr. Speaker, another point where figures cannot be trusted, that relates, Mr. Speaker, to unemployment. Unemployment, extremely important figure because it relates to people not working. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have, for some time now, had two categories of people unemployed. And conveniently, the Minister of Finance only looks at one category. He will provide the figure of unemployed people, 52,200, 9.2% of the working population. he forgets to give you another figure of 42,000 people, which is in fact people who are available for work. According to Statistics Mauritius, they are available for work but not working. But for some reason, they are not included in the figure for unemployment. When you add the two together, do you know what figure you get, Mr. Speaker? You get 94,000 people, very close to the 100,000 people that the minister himself had predicted. In fact, Mr. Speaker, even that figure is understated, and we can say for sure that the unemployment figure has gone past the figure of 100,000 in Mauritius today. Now, here is the paper. It is produced by Statistics Mauritius. It was published on 18th of May. It shows quite clearly that the number of unemployed is 94,000, Mr. Speaker. Now, these people are available for work. Why do I say it was manipulated? It is by magic. It is 42,000 today. Do you know how much it was last year, Mr. Speaker, at the same time? 2,400. So we have 2,000% increase in people available for work. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, these people should be fully described as unemployed. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, the rate of unemployment in Mauritius can be easily proven to be 16.5%, according to what Statistics Mauritius itself has produced. In fact, Mr. Speaker, when you look at the number of jobs lost, the number of jobs lost in that 1 year only is 33,000 jobs lost. Mr. Speaker, that is the second point regarding truth in the budget. Had we been told that this is a real unemployment problem, then we would know what to face. We're not told, in fact, that it is still manageable, blah, blah, blah. And the third thing, Mr. Speaker, is GDP growth. Now, why is GDP growth important? GDP growth is important because it is the basis of preparation of the budget. Once you put a figure of GDP growth, it generates the income tax you will receive. It generates it actually allows you to spend. It actually reflects itself upon the expected deficit of government. It is all pervasive, GDP growth, all pervasive. It actually, you get that wrong, you destroy the whole structure of the budget. The World Bank has given for the calendar year 3.6% expected GDP growth for Mauritius. For the financial year, the Minister of Finance forecasts, or predicts, probably is a better word, like you look at the magic crystal ball, forecasts a GDP growth of 9%. What is it based on? Tourism? Yeah, of course, à mesure fort, c'est les drains. But we'll talk about drains later. Mr. Speaker, 9% based on GDP and the land drainage program. Now, tourism, Mr. Speaker, 650,000 in the next 9 months. I had the occasion to be on radio a few days ago with the Deputy Prime Minister. I asked him, how did you calculate this figure? How many are coming from 15th July to 1st October? How many coming after? Do you know what his reply was, sir? He said, ask the Minister of Finance. That was his reply. You should ask the Minister of Finance. Figure comes from the Ministry of Finance. That's not how you build, Mr. Speaker, an economy. Now, 650,000 tourists, maybe 600, it's on record, 650,000 tourists.
Not interrupt.
Three of us were there. 650,000 tourists, Mr. Speaker, may be an aspirational figure. You may try and put it up for PR sake. Okay, let's try and do this. But to build the structure of your budget around that, Mr. Speaker, is irresponsible. It is irresponsible. We are still in the throes of COVID. In the last 2 or 3 days, We had what, last, I think 5 days, what, nearly 200 cases of COVID. Anything can happen. Anything can happen in the next few months, next few weeks, over the next year. You have to be reasonable, you have to be prudent when you build a forecast figure, otherwise people will just laugh at you. And this is what is happening. Nobody believes, Mr. Speaker, that we'll achieve the 650,000 tourists. And I understand that neither the ministry, the government itself, Mr. Speaker, has not even spoken to the airlines to see what is the expected services to be provided to Mauritius in terms of air services over the next year. And I'll talk about Air Mauritius, Mr. Speaker, a little bit later on. Now, as far as the land drainage authority is concerned, Mr. Speaker, let me say this. That's historically speaking. Something wrong? What is wrong? What is wrong? Is my English not good? Mr. Speaker, historically, if you look at the Director of Audit's report in February 2019, 2 years ago, it showed clearly that 50% of whatever was meant to be spent on drains.
Last warning.
Last warning. Spent on drains, on the amount voted to be spent on drains, only 50%. 53% were spent. So the likelihood, Mr. Speaker, is that growth will be much less, taxes receipts will be much less, the budget deficit will be higher.
No conversation.
Only thing to be expected, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned, is that a lot of the expenditure on capital will not be affected and will be carried forward. Mr. Speaker, last thing I wanted to talk about the figures was inflation. Now, just check and you'll find out that as far as the US dollar to rupee rate is concerned, 36 rupees bought $1 in November 2019.
If the honourable gentleman will give way, I would wish to refer to what he said earlier before he moves on to inflation. The Leader of the Opposition alleged that outside this House I would have stated that to explain the figure relating to tourism, he should ask the Minister of Finance. Now, I did not say that, and I believe this is an attempt to place me at odds with what the budget of the speech states, and I would request the Leader of the Opposition, unless and until he can prove what he's saying, to withdraw what he has alleged.
To give way, I'm not withdrawing anything. We have plenty of witnesses, but I would say, though, that he was unable to provide any explanation at all. Any explanation as to 15th of July to 30th of October. He said, I don't know. I can't give you any figure. And from my recollection, from 1st of October, he said, I don't have that figure either. He didn't give any explanation, and in fact, it comes from the Ministry of Finance. But we will check that, and you have a chance to correct yourself if there's any need to. Mr. Speaker, we'll go back, but I was kind enough, as you know, to give way, because that is the right thing to do. Mr. Speaker, now come back to inflation. November 2019, 36 rupees will buy you $1. In June 2020, 41 rupees will buy you the same dollar. That is a depreciation, even you can say a devaluation of 14% since the last election in the last 1.5 years. Euro is even worse. Euro, Mr. Speaker, November 2019 was 40 rupees to the euro. In June 2020, it is now 50 rupees to the euro, 25%. And we know that mostly everything that we spend our money on, 70% or more of what we spend our money on, is imported in Mauritius. And in the face of such devaluation of our currency, depreciation of our currency, when we are saying that the inflation is under control, that it is only going to be 4% over the next year, that, Mr. Speaker, is an insult to the poor consumers of Mauritius who are struggling every week when they go to the supermarket to fill their baskets to feed their families. That, Mr. Speaker, again, inflation rate as it stands, uncorrected, the basket as it is for COVID-related expenditure, which has changed with COVID. As it is, Mr. Speaker, sir, no one believes the inflation rate as given by this government. And Mr. Speaker, as far as construction costs are concerned, especially, they have gone through the roof. And whatever 5% of reimbursement that the Minister of Finance is proposing is not even going to cover, firstly, for most cases, the tax, and certainly not going to cover the huge increase in expenses that is to be expected, Mr. Speaker, has already occurred and is to be expected. Now, the current talk is that the dollar will be worth 45 rupees, Mr. Speaker, in the near future. And that when you look at the receipts of the bank in the budget, when you look at the vast increases in value-added tax, etc., it is clear that the government is banking on an accelerated depreciation of the rupee, such that any imported item obviously is valued in rupees, 15% tax is put on an item, and therefore value-added tax increases by a huge amount. Mr. Speaker, I'll finish with the figures. I'll come now to the situation in the country. There is no doubt that the country is in a big mess. And it is not just the opposition saying that, Mr. Speaker. All reputable organizations are saying exactly what the opposition is saying, even worse than what we're saying. Now, the Financial Action Task Force, in February 2020, a full 5 years after this government took office, put us on the blacklist, on the grey list. In fact, Mr. Speaker, Mauritius is considered by the Financial Action Task Force to be a danger to the global financial system. And what reasons? The 5 reasons that were given, 4 reasons were directly related to institutional failure. The inability of the government to create institutions, to manage institutions, to promote institutions that will ensure that we are not a danger to the global financial system. I'll read just the first of the 5. I don't want to do all 5 because of time. I'll just read the first one that FATF says. The first reason is deficiency, and I quote, deficiency in demonstrating that the supervisors of global business have implemented risk-based supervision. That was the first of the 5 reasons given by the Financial Action Task Force. And the rest of the reasons, I have them here, are basically in the same vein. The problem is institutional, and the problem is not anywhere else but institutional. Mr. Speaker, in March 2021, Moody's downgraded Mauritius. When I was Minister of Finance, I think it was 2012, we were lucky. We were lucky enough for Moody's to upgrade Mauritius, 2012, from BA2 to BA1. We're very proud of that, Mr. Speaker, because as a financial center, it's good that you are a credible financial center. Now, Mr. Speaker, we've been downgraded back to BA2 from BA1. And, worst of all, with a negative outlook. That is, Mr. Speaker, another downgrade is likely. Another downgrade to BA3, which is just above junk status. Imagine, Mr. Speaker, the effect on our financial services center, on the billions of rupees held by foreign institutions, by foreigners in our banking system, if we are downgraded, as looks probable, to BA3 or even to junk status, with a corresponding effect on the grading of all the banks in Mauritius. Mr. Speaker, I move on from Moody's to the IMF Article 4 mission. We expect the full report in a few weeks, but it's clear there, Mr. Speaker, that the Minister of Finance had totally ignored whatever the IMF had suggested or recommended, such as prioritizing expenditure, reforming the Bank of Mauritius Act to prevent further transfers. He said in one line that the Bank of Mauritius Act is expected. We don't know what's going to be there. We don't know what's going to be. He hasn't said so. And he said, Mr. Speaker, and that he hasn't done, that financing the Mauritius Investment Corporation should be through the consolidated fund and not through the Bank of Mauritius, because, Mr. Speaker, the Bank of Mauritius is a regulator. It is not an operator. And you cannot have an operator and regulator under the same roof. It cannot regulate itself. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, the IMF and the World Bank have requested that we change our policies in this respect. Mr. Speaker, the World Bank country report delivered sometime a few weeks ago. The title, refer to the title, Mr. Speaker. It says, "In the eye of the perfect storm." Now, Mauritius, according to the World Bank, is in the eye not only of a storm, but of a perfect storm, which is 10 times worse than a storm, 10 times more dangerous than a storm, 10 times more fatal than a storm. And that is according to the Bank of Mauritius, Mr. Speaker. And who prepared that report? By the Bank of Mauritius? By the World Bank, sorry, not Bank of Mauritius, by the World Bank. 55, Mr. Speaker, 55 renowned specialists contributed to this report. In all sectors, tourism, environment, solid waste collection, whatever you like, economists, 55 of them. And the government just puts that report in a drawer and ignores it, as if it never actually was given. But we go on, Mr. Speaker, to the Mo Ibrahim report on African governance. We were l'enfant gâté de Mo Ibrahim. He even came to Mauritius to have a conference when we were in government to congratulate Mauritius. Now, what does Mo Ibrahim say? Although he still maintains Mauritius as number one, but the gap is fast changing between us and Cabo Verde. Nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, this I'm quote directly from the report of Mo Ibrahim. Mauritius moves in the opposite direction. Its overall governance scores declines at an increasing rate. Mauritius moves in the opposite direction, that is in a bad direction, and our overall governance score declines at an increasing rate. This is what the independent Mo Ibrahim used to love Mauritius. This is what he says. And, Mr. Speaker, I won't be too long, but I'll take this issue of drugs. And here, the Global Initiative Against Transnational Crime. 2 reports dealing with Mauritius, April and June 2021. I'll come back to that in a moment, but this is a quote I'm going to use at this stage. The pervasiveness of drug fuel corruption is the single biggest obstacle to an effective response to the drug scourge. It is not the opposition saying that. It is not Xavier Duval, it is not anyone here. This is a respected international organization. 2 reports, and if you read it, it's even worse. I've not taken the worst bits. And that is what they said. Then we can go to the VDEM report. We've dealt with it here, that we are now a major autocratizing state. And to top it all, we had the ICTA consultation paper, which brought us ridicule and anger throughout the world. But still, Mr. Speaker, these are the problems that Mauritius is facing, whether it be economic, whether it be governance, whether it be social, whether it be drugs, whether it be democracy. And these are international organizations telling us. And what has the Minister of Finance had to say about all these problems? Answer is simple, 0. These problems were not dealt with either directly, maybe indirectly here and there, were not dealt with by the Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, let's take drugs. Drugs, Mr. Speaker, if we live in Mauritius, we can see for ourselves the extent of drug problem in Mauritius. Everywhere you go, places that were decent, a few years ago, now infested with drug peddlers and drug addicts. Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you this. I've made some research. Despite the massive seizures that you have seen, we have seen massive seizures, you must agree with that. Despite that, Mr. Speaker, heroin continues to flood our country, at an even greater rate. Prices of heroin, because that is a good barometer of how much is around. Prices of a dose of heroin, I'm told, Mr. Speaker, have fallen now to only 200 rupees for heroin, despite all the massive seizures. Tons, almost, not tons, but hundreds of kilos of drugs, Mr. Speaker. So, and this is what, again, a quote from that Global Initiative report of June 21. This is what they said on Mauritius. The Seychelles and Mauritius have some of the highest rates of heroin use in the world. We have some of the highest rates of heroin use in the world, and hardly a word in the budget. Hardly a word in the budget in a country which has one of the highest rates of heroin use in the world. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, you have to speak the truth to the people. You have to tell them we have a drug problem. This is how we want to address it. Now, we know that there's been lip service paid to the report of the Commission of Inquiry, but the major recommendations we know have not been implemented, or at least have been implemented with little effectiveness, for reasons I don't know. Now, I'm told, Mr. Speaker, that the number of ATSU officers, 425, is almost the same number as the number of VIPSU officers, of 400. Now, VIPSU officers protect about 30 VIPs. ATSU officers protect a whole nation of 1.3 million, and they have the same number of people, or virtually the same number of officers attached to them. This budget, Mr. Speaker, ignores the drug problem entirely and gives no hope to tens of thousands of drug users. Even gives no hope to hundreds, I presume, of people who suffer from various diseases, which would be of help by medical cannabis, even that, now that it is legalized, if you say, by the World Health Organization, even that, Mr. Speaker, isn't mentioned. So we have a police force dramatically undertrained and under-equipped, not undermanned. We have 13,000 policemen, represents one policeman for every 100 population. That is a very high number. And soon, Mr. Speaker, we have another 4,000 new recruits, when we know, Mr. Speaker, it is a number of policemen that matter. It is how they are equipped, how they are trained, how they are motivated, how they are rewarded. That is what matters. And nothing, Mr. Speaker, on how we are going to reform the training of our police officers. I'll say this again, Mr. Speaker. When I went to Germany, I was asked to go to Germany to look at their system there. A German police officer had 3 years of training before he joined the force as a constable. In Mauritius, 6 months of training. Do you think they can be as effective as a German police officer? And when you look at their equipment, you think you live, Mr. Speaker, in a different world. Anyway, that is drugs, completely ignored. The other issue, Mr. Speaker, is youth unemployment. Now, youth unemployment in Mauritius, currently about 36%. It hovers around that figure, 25, 26 over the years, Mr. Speaker. That is 1 in 4 persons, according to Statistics Mauritius. And the budget here offers more of the same. Graduate scheme, here, there. And what the World Bank has asked us to do is to revamp, re-energize that system, provide dynamism. And whilst we haven't done that, whilst our universities are some of the worst in Africa, are some of the worst in the world, Mr. Speaker, according to Webometrics, which is a respected analyzing a ranking firm, according to Webometrics, Mr. Speaker, the University of Mauritius ranks 2,276 in the world. The University of Technology Mauritius ranks 6,949 in the world. Open University, 16,316th in the world. Now, this is a sort of university education we are giving to our graduates. At the same time now, we say that we are going to open massively to overseas foreign youth to come to Mauritius, either in the Financial Services Center, where the requirement for occupation permit has been reduced to 30,000 rupees per month, or after doing only 3 years to become a graduate in Mauritius. These youth, Mr. Speaker, they need to be trained to compete. They need to be given the tools to compete. And we're not doing that. We are opening them dangerously to foreign competition, to destroy all their jobs prospects without giving them the education, especially tertiary education, but even secondary education, that is required to allow them to compete. And so, Mr. Speaker, so you have the young Mauritian guy comes out of his university, which is 16,000 in the world, and suddenly he'll have someone coming to work in financial services from UK, from France, from South Africa, coming from the best universities, because that is what their country has given them. Whereas this is what we are giving to our country. The opening that is being proposed by the Minister of Finance can be given. It can be given after we have done the necessary to train and educate our youth to compete with people in the world. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, it will just be a massacre. It will just be a massacre. When I was Minister of Tourism, I actually prevented foreign managers coming to Mauritius because I had seen, Mr. Speaker, that people were coming to work in Mauritius as managers. Why? They were European. Our tourists are European. Obviously, if you're a manager, a hotel owner, you will take that sort of person to welcome your tourists. Even a bartender, he will do better if he's European, facing Europeans, than a Mauritian. So we had to stop that, to give Mauritians a chance. And today, when you look at the hotel sector, I'm proud to see that we have many Mauritian managers that we did not have before. So, Mr. Speaker, we have graduate chômeurs, and that is going to look much more likely that we'll have thousands more of graduate chômeurs in the years to come if this policy is not abandoned. The two policies, as I mentioned, one is the 3 years, 10-year work permit after only 3 years study in Mauritius. I looked at the situation in Canada, I looked in the situation in Australia, I looked at the situation in UK, and, Mr. Speaker, if you study in these countries, you get 2 to 3 years of work permit. I have not seen Singapore, Mr. Speaker, only 1 year. Here in Mauritius, for some unknown reason, we have decided to give 10 years of work permit to anyone coming to study. And you can see that people who come to study will not be coming to study. They will be coming to work. Study will just be an excuse to work in Mauritius, and you'll be able to attract lots of people from these countries with high unemployment, and they'll come pretending to study, but in fact, they will be doing the 20 hours, which is hard to control, and then the 10-year work permit. Mr. Speaker, perhaps the biggest omission of all is that the Minister of Finance has not spoken about the fight against COVID, except to tell us that he'll be taxing us on our petrol to pay for some vaccine, although he doesn't need the money at all, and it can be easily demonstrated. Not a word, Mr. Speaker, on how we are going to fight COVID. Health, I mean, the health issues related to COVID. I understand that the government is not proud. It's not proud of its record. Far back as December 2020, when we requested the government to pre-order vaccines, because that was what many enlightened countries were doing, we were told that our request was stupidity. On the 4th of February of this year, the minister and his advisor, Mrs. Go. In fact, in February of this year, both of them, and the minister on 4th of February, he said, Mr. Speaker, sir, that there was no urgency to order vaccines for Mauritius. We've moved on February to no urgency to what the Deputy Prime Minister admitted some time ago, seule solution, vaccination. So we moved in the space of a few months from no urgency and stupidity to seule solution, vaccination. And Mr. Speaker, so there was a real negligence in pre-ordering vaccines from a list of vaccines that were likely to be approved, as many other countries have done. And then we moved, once we got the vaccine, to a totally unnecessary, probably illegal, total disclaimer form, saying that it's absolutely my own personal responsibility if I accept to take the vaccine. The government, the manufacturer, anyone has no liability at all, even if they put the greatest rubbish in my arm. That is what the total disclaimer form was meant to achieve. And of course, Mr. Speaker, many of our people in Mauritius were reluctant to be vaccinated in the face of such a total disclaimer form, which tended to say, we really don't know what we're doing, but if you want to be vaccinated, be vaccinated. So that was a total disclaimer form, and vaccinations took off on the wrong footing in Mauritius. And then, of course, Mr. Speaker, fight against COVID, there was a policy of vaccinating. Every country in the world has chosen to vaccinate the old first. The older, the earlier. And secondly, Mr. Speaker, those with comorbidities. In Mauritius, it was different. We decided to vaccinate employees of Business Mauritius first. God knows why. That was the only country to do that policy. And even today, Mr. Speaker, when we are vaccinating, we have hundreds of people, old people, being vaccinated in the morning usually. They are left to stand in the rain, in the sun. Some people faint. One person has died. They're not even given chairs to sit on. That is what's happening every day. In the morning, in the afternoon, we continue with the policy of vaccinating young people. I don't understand this. I don't understand this. It's obvious that we should adopt international practice, even World Health Organization practice, and vaccinate the old and those with comorbidities first. So now, Mr. Speaker, we put our old people in buses, we get them to stand in long queues, in the rain, and that is our new vaccination policy. Mr. Speaker, had the government listened to the opposition at the time, had they not been stubborn in their inaction, as they are today with this budget, we would have been out of the crisis. We would have been out of the crisis. And let's hope that we can all get vaccinated before we actually reach the 1st of October. But I have my doubts, given the past record. But let us hope that this can be done, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned, we have a surge of cases at the moment. Of course, Mr. Speaker, the opening of our borders is heavily reliant on the vaccination of our population. When are we actually going to open the borders? Apparently partially on the 15th of July. We don't know what is going to be the outcome of that, and then probably on the 1st of October, a full opening. Mr. Speaker, that doesn't answer everything. What is the problem? Is there a problem, Mr. Speaker?
You have 10 minutes to go.
Why 10 minutes?
This is the paper I received from the whip, and 1 hour.
No, Mr. Speaker. I was told it is unlimited. This is not right.
Mr. Speaker, sir, it was agreed that it is unlimited.
Unlimited?
Yes.
So what is this paper you said?
It's only indicative to work on the time, but it's unlimited.
So you don't
It
want
was agreed.
Parliament
Yeah.
and change language. Continue. Unlimited.
Thank you very much. Like the spending, government spending. So tourism, Mr. Speaker, it depends on the vaccination. Let's hope we get the doses and we actually vaccinate people. Now, when we open on the 1st of October, we are told now the wage assistance scheme will cease. Now, on the 1st of October, suddenly all our restaurants will be full, all the leisure parks will be full, all the boat houses will be working as they are, all the beach walkers will be selling as they need, all the pleasure craft will be full of tourists. That's not likely to be the case, although the Minister of Finance is very optimistic. It's likely to take a lot of time, because even his figure is about 60% of the normal tourists that we receive in a year. So how can the wage assistance scheme stop on the 1st of October? It cannot stop on the 1st of October. It may need to be tweaked, it may need to be amended, but it cannot stop. If it stops, we're going to go to vast unemployment in the tourism sector. Let's hope, therefore, that the way that has been said gives rise to misinterpretation, and that is, I presume, not the intention of the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Tourism, and that again he comes and clears that issue, Mr. Speaker. So on tourism, that is one point. Second point, Mr. Speaker, we are going to now increase the percentage of rooms that can be sold under the Invest Hotel scheme to foreigners. Now, let's understand what is the Invest Hotel scheme. It was there for a reason, because there were many hotels which needed the help. What is the Invest Hotel? It is, in fact, a disguised name for time sharing. And all of us know in Mauritius, the Minister of Tourism maybe doesn't know, but all of us know in Mauritius that time sharing was prohibited in Mauritius for a long, long time. A long, long time, didn't want time. Why isn't time sharing allowed? Because in fact, when you build a hotel room and then you rent it out to the tourists, you have two sources of income. One, when the income comes, the FDI hopefully, to build the hotel room. Secondly, when the tourist comes to rent the hotel room. You have two. Whereas in Invest Hotel scheme, whereas in time sharing, the money only comes once. The same person that will build the house will stay in the room 6 months or more now. So you only get one income. So tomorrow, if all your hotels were to become Invest Hotels, your tourism receipt would fall to a trickle, because all of them, in fact, would have invested only in the rooms to build, not in the rooms to rent. Whereas you want people to invest in the rooms to build, and secondly, people to rent your rooms. You have two sources of income. So I hope, Mr. Speaker, that this Invest Hotel scheme, as being suggested, will be reversed. This is not acceptable, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, another thing I want to talk about is branding. We were courageous enough at the time, it was 2010, to enter into a branding exercise. Now, what is branding? People don't understand what branding is. Branding is not just about a logo or about a caption. It is how a country lives. It is how the culture, the religion, the intercommunal. It is about the environment. It's all the things that define a country. And so the government doesn't agree with what we did. Okay, but it still uses our logo, Mauritius. Okay. So, Mr. Speaker, the most important aspect of a branding exercise is a brand book that defines a country and defines the way that you have to continue forward in a country. Now, and then you have the logo, and then you'll have the slogan. What surprised me is, I think ADB, government anyway, launched a branding exercise in the face of COVID, as if someone could come to Mauritius, some well-known agency, and tell how Mauritius ticks, how we work, when the country is in confinement, when there's no culture, when there's no religion, when there's no interaction, when everybody is more or less confined, apart from working, to the house or to the shopping center. It's not serious. It's ridiculous. How can you do a branding exercise en plein confinement? And now I understand, I'm not sure that the branding has been abandoned. But the mere fact of launching a tender during a confinement period to brand Mauritius makes us a laughing stock, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, let's hope, as I said, that we can open on the 1st of October, because I understand today Boris Johnson in UK is going to postpone the full opening of his country by another month, because the herd immunity that we all caring about, we all put so much emphasis on, is not working in the UK, especially against the Indian variant. So he's postponing full opening. Let's see what it does in a moment, to at least another month. And so for us to bank on the 15th of July or the 1st of October for the 650,000 tourists, Mr. Speaker, this is why it's absolutely unrealistic, and this is why we ought to have put maybe half, 300,000. 400,000 would have been an optimistic number to achieve in the 9 months to June 2022. Mr. Speaker, what does tourism rely on? It relies on civil aviation. And have you noticed, Mr. Speaker, not a single question replied to in this House on Air Mauritius, but that civil aviation policy does not even warrant one paragraph in the speech of the Minister of Finance. Does he know that Air Mauritius exists? Does he know that we need air services and that Air Mauritius caters for 55 or used to cater 55 up to 60% of our tourists coming to Mauritius? Well, doesn't seem to be the case. We're not given any clarity at all about what is to happen to Air Mauritius, what is to happen to civil aviation, and how the 650,000 tourists, all the exports of the EPZ, all the Mauritians that need to travel, how they will do over the next few months and years. We are not told anything, Mr. Speaker, about drugs. We're not told anything in the budget speech about COVID. We're not told anything, Mr. Speaker, about civil aviation. Now, these are three elephants in the room that the government is ignoring. Mr. Speaker, let's come now to the environment. Now, what has been the defining event concerning the environment over the last year, since the last budget? What has been the defining event? Wakashu, Mr. Speaker. Wakashu has been the defining event over the last 12 months. Do we hear anything like that? Anything that shows that we have learned the lessons of Wakashu, that we have respect to the up to 150,000 people that marched on 3 occasions to protest against how government handled Wakashu? Nothing. Not a word, Mr. Speaker. But that is a huge markment, a huge failure, because we need to prevent another Wakashu. We need to be able to say that wherever a ship now is disabled, or there's a drunk captain, or whatever there is, whenever that ship threatens Mauritius, we will be able to counter it. And there are ways to counter it. It is just as if Wakashu never existed for government. Mr. Speaker, We need to be able to protect our environment. That is important, Mr. Speaker. Why? What could have been done? The ministry, the budget ought to have announced a new Maritime Zones Act. A new Maritime Zones Act to prevent ships crossing the Indian Ocean to enter into our 12-mile nautical zone. We ought to have been able, we ought to propose that. Other countries, Mr. Speaker, delimitate what is, where is, what passage, what route a ship uses for innocent passage. We need to urgently prevent ships, dangerous ships, from passing too close to our shores. Mr. Speaker, on the 26th of May, Beaj Jaya nearly had the same fate as Wakasho. Nearly had the same fate. And we were in fact lucky that its engines restarted. And therefore, it saved us another Wakasho. But as I say, Mr. Speaker, what are the lessons that we have learned? Apparently, no lesson. So, no change proposed to the Maritime Zones Act. No change proposed, no consolidation of the Merchant Shipping Act, of the Fisheries Act, of the Ports Act. All need to be modernized. All need to be harmonized before, Mr. Speaker, we can say that we can prevent another Wakasho. And that is an important message to give. The MPA, Mr. Speaker. I was the last person who bought tugs for the MPA. That was years back. Since that time, there were no tugs. We need to buy. And I thought the minister would have announced that the MPA is buying 1 or 2 ocean-going powerful tugs that tomorrow can act to protect our country. So much money is being spent left, right, and center. We cannot find a few hundred million rupees to buy a powerful tug on standby here. We cannot. Mr. Speaker, our helicopters at the airport, it's time that they are 24/7 operation. We cannot act like in the 1960s, that it's only operating up to 7 p.m., and then the pilots go home, and then if ever we need them, there's a big issue. People are dying at night around our shores. And the helicopter service has got to step up with not only the pilots, but also crew that can act all through the night on a 24/7 basis, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, maybe one last thing. This country, hundreds of ships go by every month, thousands of ships every year near to our coast. Isn't it time that we buy a proper lifeboat? Like you see overseas, a proper lifeboat that can go out in any weather to save people. We had, very near to my house, 2 dramatic incidents over the year. One is the tug Sir Gaëtan Duval, and the other one is the loss of a fisherman, Mr. Carozin, some weeks ago. One reason why is because the Poudre d'Or Coast Guard is so ill-equipped with only 1 wooden pirogue and 1 little outboard motor that they carry on the shoulder to put on the pirogue, and that is meant, Mr. Speaker, to deal with any accident at sea. And you would have thought, with 2 accidents at sea, in the same area as the Poudre d'Or Coast Guard, that you would have had a change, and that has not happened, and nothing is mentioned in the budget speech, Mr. Speaker. The stepping up, the modernization of our sea rescue service is an industry in itself, which could promote not only to ensure security in the ocean, but also to protect our environment. Mr. Speaker, staying on the environment, I'm happy when we recruit people. Makes me happy. But we don't just recruit people and then we don't equip them. Now I'm going to table a picture I've taken myself. I've blacked out the names, the faces of the persons. About 15 people clearing in the north of the island a few days ago. 15 of them. And you can see one of them had a Fossi. Another one had a Saab. None of them had any equipment. Are we saying that, for instance, Landscope is going to recruit 2,000 people? I'm not sure they were Landscope, but they were government, these guys. 2,000 people and not give them the right equipment. They are going to be given Fossi, and that is how we are going to achieve a clean Mauritius. That is how our tourism industry is to be protected. So, Mr. Speaker, I'll table that because no one would believe that this picture was taken in 2021. Maybe in 1950s, 3 jours à Paris, 4 jours à Paris, we could have done that. Not in 9, and this is not acceptable, Mr. Speaker. Not only is it a total waste of public money, but it is so totally ineffective, and this is why the country is so dirty. Mr. Speaker, the World Bank has been very harsh on Mauritius, not only saying that we are in the eye of the perfect storm, but this is what he had to say as far as the export industries are concerned. This is what the title is, From Decline to Collapse. From Decline to Collapse. That is the title of that section dealing with our export competitiveness. So this is an extremely serious issue. What is export competitiveness? What is it? It is, in fact, when either your prices are too high or your quality is not good enough. That is what is meant by export. We cannot produce sugar at the right price, or our textiles is not the right quality, or it's too expensive, etc., etc. That is export. And same for the tourism. Our rooms are too expensive, the quality of the destination is not good enough. And, Mr. Speaker, the World Bank says this, that deteriorating external competitiveness of Mauritius warrants attention. Did it get any attention in this budget? No. Not a single thing to improve our export competitiveness, which means that we can look forward, probably, Mr. Speaker, to much more unemployment in the coming months and years. On textiles, not a word, again, completely ignoring textiles. It used to employ about 9,000 people. Now it's struggling to employ even 40,000 people. FDI hardly coming in. Last year, the Minister of Finance promised us a report to foster transformation of textiles. Where is that report? A year has gone by. Where is the report on fostering transformation of textiles? I'll tell you where it is. I think 2 weeks ago, ISP issued an expression of interest. 2 weeks ago, or 1 week ago. So let's have an expression of interest to have this done. But obviously then it shows only that the Minister of Industry did not think there was any urgency to it. If he's taken 11.5 months to actually commission or even to ask for an expression of interest, when will the tender be allocated? When will the report be given? We don't know. And the textile industry is slowly dying. This is why, Mr. Speaker, we say that this budget has ignored the problems, whether it is economic or whether it is social. What about sugar? I welcome the price of 3,300 rupees per ton of sugar to be paid to bagasse producers. I welcome that. It's been on the cards for a long time. But then again, there's a report of the World Bank on sugar. Where is that report? Aren't the employers, the employees, the planters, small and big, the millers, all the workers, wherever they are, even in the fields or in the mills, aren't they entitled to know what the future is made of? They are not entitled to have, even us as parliamentarians, a copy of the World Bank report on the sugar sector. What is it suggesting? What is it recommending? What is wrong? What is right? What needs to be done? Again, it's a lack of respect to these thousands of people whose future depends on sugar and who now, up to now, have been living on subsidy, hopefully a bit less now with the increase in the price of bagasse. But we need to know, Mr. Speaker, what the experts have said, and it is a duty of the government to publish the report, Welbeck report on sugar. Mr. Speaker, I come now to the pensioners, and I wanted to say a few things. This is the second year running with no increase, whilst there have been huge increases in the cost of living, including the cost of purchasing medicine. But I wanted to say one thing, Mr. Speaker, because we've been criticized all the time, saying, you know, the pension was so low in the previous Labour Party PMSD government, was so low. But we forget, Mr. Speaker, that we had for 1 year, for one budget, one Minister of Finance named Pravin Kumar Jagannath. And he actually decided on the rate of increase. And you can check, Prime Minister. He decided on the rate of increase to be given in that year, in his budget speech of 2010, to give to poor pensioners for the year 2011. And do you know how much was given? Do you remember? 98 rupees, Mr. Speaker, 98 rupees. It was only 10 rupees more than inflation. So, obviously, we were together in 2014. We know how it came that the 5,000 rupee offer was made to pensioners for the increase in pensions. We know also that this is being used now as an electoral ploy, Mr. Speaker, for the vulnerable groups. So let's keep things reasonable. Let's not always blame the past, because you were also part of the past. We shouldn't forget that. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned, there's so much money floating around that it probably will be used in the end to pay, at least for the 1 year. After, we don't know. But it's interesting to read the submission of Business Mauritius in the courts as to the likely future to be reserved to contribution sociale généralisée. And this is what they said, Mr. Speaker, after a study. They said, Mr. Speaker, that to be able to pay the full pension that has been promised by the government, to be able to pay the full pension, full increase in pension of 4,500 rupees, I think it's 2023, to be able to pay that, you will not need to double the rate of CSG, double the rate that is payable on to the contribution sociale généralisée, which is just a pure tax. That is, for the lower income, it will move from 4.5% to 9%, and for the middle and higher income, it's going to move, Mr. Speaker, to increase from 12% to 24%. Can you imagine? This is what Business Mauritius has submitted after its calculations, that CSG, to be able to pay the full increase of 4,500 promised by the government, CSG will have to be increased to 24% of salary. Can you imagine? You pay 24% of salary, you pay your tax, you pay solidarity income, you pay your VAT, what is left, Mr. Speaker? It will all have gone to the Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to end, Mr. Speaker, by saying that we've had a lot of reports overseas to support everything that the government, that the opposition has been saying about the state of our nation. It is highly regrettable that none of the issues that matter for our daily lives, that matter for the future of this country, none of these issues have been treated or considered in this budget speech. We have pretended to ignore the hugely important problems facing our country. Whether it's the environment, whether it's the drugs, whether it's youth unemployment, whatever it is. This budget, Mr. Speaker, offers no hope to the people who are suffering from drugs, to the unemployed, to anyone else. Mr. Speaker, this budget offers no solution to the loss of competitiveness, therefore loss of jobs, loss of profits in all our export sectors. This budget proposes no structural reforms capable of creating prosperity. This budget, in fact, is just a shopping list of things the government will do for political reasons. Mr. Speaker, what this budget does is announce 65 billion rupees of spending on projects which will have no impact at all on revenue generation. We can be thankful that it is not actually proposing any white elephants like we've seen before, Safe City, Kodo Stadium, etc. Even the 50-story building seems to have disappeared from the budget. So there seems to be no white elephants, but nothing in the 65 billion rupees that is being proposed is going to generate any revenue which will help us to pay off the debts that will be taken to carry out these projects. And Mr. Speaker, perhaps worst of all, nothing in this budget will stop the slide of the Mauritian rupee against all the other currencies, which is going to have a devastating effect on purchasing power, on the living standards of Mauritius, and in the future, Mr. Speaker, the acceleration of the depreciation of the rupee is something that is already now a fact. Mr. Speaker, to finish, the population has rejected this budget. It has felt clobbered by more taxes. At a time of spiraling inflation, it knows that it has been fooled with lots of projects that will never see the day. So, Mr. Speaker, to finish, Mr. Speaker, I'll say that we on this side of the opposition, we totally reject this budget, and it is totally inadequate for the challenging lives that we live. Thank you, sir.
In view of the time, I will suspend the sitting for 1.5 hours.